Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you to James, and hopefully what I'm going to talk to you about this morning will articulate nicely with what James has just said. For those of you who don't know me, for those of you who are not on Twitter, my name is David Walker. I'm the Head of Technology Enhanced Learning at the University of Sussex, and it's a great pleasure to talk to you this morning. What I'd like to do is, I'd like us to start to think about, or begin to think about, the discourse that shapes many of the digital change initiatives within our own institutions. And what I want to suggest is that our approach to communication and engagement has a major impact on our ability to influence practice and promote digital capability enhancement. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of the lessons I've learned from establishing the new Technology Enhanced Learning Office at the University of Sussex. And what I also hope to do is conclude with a nod to the debate this afternoon by suggesting that our IT trainers and our digital learning technologists will have a key role in enabling digital capability in the future. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to ask Fiona to give me a nod when we've got a 5-minute warning. Okay, so first of all, this is not the motto for tonight's conference dinner, though it may be for many of you. This is a phrase that came through a webinar that I saw from the brilliant Donna Lancelos, who was giving a talk to Leeds Beckett University. And she suggested that some of the conversation around institutional systems ends up being a way of discussing the messy institutional processes we encounter, or avoids it. And certainly that's my experience of working in this field. A lot of our conversations are dominated by discussions around technology, when at the heart of many change processes, people are really the issue that we're considering. So when we think about the unruly, and in my own context at Sussex, that was very much what I found when I arrived there in 2014. So I had the pleasure of being invited to come to Sussex. I'd been at Dundee for 10 years, and I was invited to come and establish the new Technology Enhanced Learning Office at Sussex back in January 2014. Now, for many of you, you're thinking you've had learning technology teams or e-learning departments for a long time, but Sussex was in a period of major change. The university was going through a major restructuring process. There was a major strategic growth agenda. The department which I took over from had been stood down, a teaching and learning development unit. The university was considering refocusing on technology enhanced learning. So it was a major period of change. Alongside that, there was already set in stone a new major change initiative to deliver a true end-to-end solution for e-assessment and e-feedback. There was many competing services who had an interest in the digital and the provision of digital capabilities training, and I think James highlighted that in his last talk. Also on the horizon was a major transformation project. The university was looking at the replacement of its student record system, and it was talking about how it was going to achieve that. So I arrived at a time of what you could call a really unruly period. There was a lot happening, there was a lot of things in the air, and it was a period where I had to think carefully about how was I going to communicate this new service that I was implementing, my own digital change initiative, and how was I going to frame that. So I'd like to start with some framing propositions for you, and I've borrowed this approach from probably my best friend Keith Smythe. Those of you who are in this field will know Keith really well. He likes a framing proposition. First of all, I'm going to put it to you that change in higher education tends to the developmental rather than the transformational. So I've been in higher education all my career. I've been in HE for about 15 years now, working from an assistant learning technologist through learning technologist, senior learning technologist, and now head of TEL. And in that time, I would suggest to you that change is an organic process. It's much more evolutionary than transformational. I'd also like to suggest to you that the ambiguous nature of some of the terms we use around change are quite threatening, and many of these terms are quite ambiguous to many of the stakeholders we engage with. Unsurprisingly, because as Fiona has suggested, communication is at the heart of what I'm talking to you about today, I think communication and resilience are the cornerstones of effective change. And what I hope to suggest as well is that professional support provision will be key to enabling future digital capability developments. The problem in our line of work, and I think many of us will have been guilty of this, is that it's easy to be seduced by the next big thing. And this is a quote that comes from Professor Dylan William, who's at the Institute of Education in London. And I think quite correctly, he points out there's a tendency for us to look for the next big thing, which would make sense if we were already doing all the other things we know to improve student experience at the moment. And we don't do that. So it's very important that when we think about our strategies and how we communicate, that we don't get distracted by the shiny, don't get seduced by technologies, that we don't become technologically deterministic. Resistance is far from futile. It's one, if not the primary, cause of failure in most change initiatives and organisations, particularly when you start to think about the breadth and depth of any proposed change. If the bigger the breadth, the broader the impact, the higher the likelihood of resistance. So we have to think very carefully about how we communicate, how this affects people, how they're going to react to it. Uncertainty can often be exacerbated by poor communication and failure to engage with many of our stakeholders to try and understand how the changes we are going to implement is going to affect their lives and their work. So I want to show you some examples of the language that unfortunately afflicts our sector at the moment, and it's not going to be a surprise to many of you. Let's start with a quote that I found from the Times Higher Education, and I think this is quite telling. This was an article by Peter Scott earlier this year, and he's talking about some work that he's been doing at the University of Toronto. He made the mistake of describing them as very good in his preliminary feedback. He got a withering look. We're not interested in being very good, he was told. They have to be world-beating. How many of us have heard that? Many of our institutions are aiming to be the leading institution in either in the sector, in their country. Whether they've told the other universities to stand still, that's not clear. But this dehumanising language is everywhere. Let's have a look at some more examples. We have a research excellence framework. Excellence dominates much of what we do. I came from the University of Dundee. I'd been there for 10 years. One of the pillars of their strategy is excellence. I'm not quite sure what it means, though. We've got a new teaching excellence framework. What does excellence look like in terms of teaching? Do any of the measures in the proposed TEF closely resemble anything at all to do with teaching, let alone excellence? Here's another example of excellence. Apologies to Imperial College, but I saw this and I thought this was a good example. The pursuit of excellence in all that we do. Another major strategic change initiative within one of our universities where digital is at the heart of what they're trying to achieve. How about some transformation now? Transformation is everywhere. And this is from the Higher Education Academy, leading transformation in learning and teaching. Many of us will have been involved in some of these initiatives. And actually, if we look at some of the work by JISC as well, I, unfortunately as well, I will put my hand up and say I've been involved in some of these programs, transformation programs. We've got a strange addiction to use of language that many of us do not share a discourse in. That common language that James was referring to is everywhere. There is a problem with transformation, though, and it's this. This is a comment that I found on Twitter just last week. Alan Wright, who I had the pleasure of meeting just a couple of weeks ago in Edinburgh at the CEDA conference. He's a Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at the University of Windsor in Canada, and he said, transformative is a fundamental qualitative change. It means you can't go back to your earlier conception. He was quoting Brookfield. So you can see that that's quite challenging when you start to think about transformation, because when you're talking to people and talking about transforming what they do, their roles, their careers, their areas of work, it's very difficult to reconcile that what you're doing needs to change so significantly, so markedly from what you're currently doing. Why is it so different? Why is it so wrong? And we need to think about the challenges of that. The problem is, as we know as well in our sector, is that transformation in terms of learning technologies has been a theme for a long time. Diana Laurillard said back in 2008, it's been on the brink for decades, and it still is. And I think we need to be conscious of that when we use our language and when we think about the impact it has. So, taking me back to my own context at the University of Sussex and trying to develop a brand new technology-enhanced learning team in an institution heavily focused on research, a major change agenda, big restructuring going on, a big digital change initiative in the development of an e-submission and e-feedback solution for all. How was I going to build this team? How was I going to make sure that people were aware of its role? How was it actually going to fulfill its requirement to build the digital capabilities of the institution? So I suggest to you that genuine engagement is key, and this is something that I felt. It was going to be important for us to promote dialogue. We had to really engage with our stakeholders. As James was saying, understand those needs, look for the gaps, legitimise the voice of all, recognise that the changes that we were going to bring about were going to impact on culture, And there's a big emotional element to this. So whether that's implementation of a new VLE or introduction of e-submission and e-marking, you're talking about changes in practice. And people have concerns, and rightly so have concerns, and we need to think about those concerns and what they mean to them. How are we going to discuss them? And one of the other things that I felt was really important to recognise that change is a sustained process, and communication has to be sustained to support that as well. The approach we've taken at Sussex is to recognise that partnership is a key approach to enhancement. It's the model that we've adopted. We communicate, we collaborate across schools, with staff, with students, and with the sector. My learning technologists were all appointed within about 6 months. They're aligned to different schools. They work on a cluster basis, the arts and humanities, the social sciences, the sciences. The rationale behind that, to try and understand the differences in disciplinary practices, to appreciate there are differences in disciplinary pedagogies, to understand needs and build relationships. We tried to work with staff across our professional services as well, because as I've said, there's lots of people with an interest in the digital space. Many people with a stake in this area, whether that's your library, your career service, your IT services. We've tried to try and collaborate with all of them. We needed to engage the student voice as well, and at Sussex at that time, the relationship with the students was perhaps slightly strained. There had been some student protests on campus, but there was big efforts underway to bring students into the system, to improve student representation, to build dialogue with them, and that was very, very important for us as well. I was also given a key task of raising the profile of the University of Sussex externally, but also crucially to bring externality into Sussex. It was felt really important to bring some of the expertise that many of you in this room have into the university, to try and bring that sort of profile to our staff, to recognise some of the major developments in the field. So we tried to work across these areas. Communication was key, and language is important. We had to recognise that our staff were not all in digital spaces. They did not inhabit the same spaces that myself and my staff inhabited. So we needed to think about our media. We needed to think about how we were going to raise our profile. And a really planned communication strategy was key. So whether that's through our print media and our newsletters that many of you will have, whether that's through our blog, which is crucial to building and raising our profile externally, but also through our Twitter account, which allows us to disseminate the work of some of our staff in the institution, but also to curate and disseminate many of the valuable resources that we find through our activities. Each of these areas is managed by a member of our team. They have responsibility for that particular area, whether it's our Twitter account, which is managed by the fantastic Anne Ho, many of you will know Anne, our blog managed by fantastic Sally Burr at Burblog on Twitter, and our newsletter, which is now managed by my colleague Kitty Horn. What was crucial behind this was a proper, thought-through strategy of how we were going to curate this content and how we were going to communicate. So we try and plan all of our communications. We take a real detailed approach to do that. We plan all our blog posts a month in advance, although you might notice that somebody called David is a bit lacking filling in his bit. You'll also see that on the right-hand side there we have a tweet bank. All members of the team are required to contribute to that tweet bank. It's just a Google spreadsheet, but it gives us a constant supply of material to send out through our accounts to allow us to constantly communicate and engage with our users, so that there is a constant presence of Sussex Tel in those digital spaces as our staff begin to move into them. We tried to then reach out to those people around the institution who are also active in digital places, our library, our career service, and we decided rather than work in silos, we would work with them. So an example of this is our new Mobile Technologies Week, established in 2014, but now has become an annual occurrence. It brought those services together to blend the digital, to try and embed technology into the fabric of the life of the university. And it was something that has been very successful for us. But something that was really of a challenge to us whilst we set up this new team, while we bedded it in, was at the same time there was a requirement to deliver a major change initiative, a £1 million project to deliver e-submission and e-feedback. Not just an integration of Turnitin, but a true end-to-end system, which saw the creation of assessments from a student record system at the start, through to the return of marks and feedbacks back to the student record system at the end, with inbuilt moderation capabilities as well. So this was a major cross-institutional initiative that we were also facing, and we had to think about the impact that was going to have on the institution, the culture of the institution. We're talking about changing practice again, changing culture. How people mark is very, very well established. It was an opportunity for us as well, though. It was an opportunity to manage and capitalise on this major change. The project, which was presented at a recent USISA conference, was led by a brilliant IT project manager, Catherine Jones, and it also involved representation from many of the professional services, our quality enhancement colleagues, our colleagues across the schools, our school administrators and IT services, and it allowed us to build relationships with staff on the ground and staff within the back office as well. For TEL, it was an opportunity to develop a comprehensive programme of staff development. It allowed us to put our head above the parapet, to reach out and meet many of the staff in the institution who were going to have to be engaged in this project. What we had to do, though, was acknowledge uncertainty and the threat to security that it presented, and we were very mindful of that. And we did that by over-communicating. We reached out, we did roadshows, we met with people individually, we liaised with heads of school, and we maintained a user forum which now meets monthly to try and address concerns. But for us, it's been really powerful as a change agent. Something we've learned through this, though, is sharing a common language is really beneficial. And it's something now that I look for in my team and in the people that I recruit to join my team. You need to understand the differences in disciplinary pedagogies and professional discourse. What works within mathematics may not necessarily be what works within business and management. I try to encourage all my staff to engage in the postgraduate certificate in higher education we have at Sussex, because I feel that it enhances their credibility as they engage with the academics on the ground. They can share the language, they can understand the challenges they face. CMALT has become something that's very useful, certified membership of the Association for Learning Technology, to allow my staff to engage with others in their own professional field, also to reflect on their own practice and think about their own digital development. Where is their career path? And also for engaging with our colleagues in IT services, where increasingly there's the language of ITIL and Prince 2. Members of my team have been looking at that and developing skills. And certainly sharing that language has been beneficial to us to bridge some of the divides between us and help us deliver some of the changes that we pursue. 5 minutes. So, sharing these languages, appreciating the threat of change and the importance of language, I think is really key as we try to drive change in digital capabilities in institutions. So here's some data which comes from, I think it's an NMC Horizon report from 2 years ago, which highlighted low digital fluency of faculty. It's something that we need to try and work on. It's one of the major change initiatives that we all face. But one of the challenges we face and how we mitigate that is how we consider issues of lack of time, lack of knowledge, lack of money. If we look at some of the enablers for change, on our own USISA survey, the TEL survey from 2014, I'll put it to you that the people in this room, our IT trainers, our learning technologists, our technology enhanced learning teams, will be key enablers for change in the future. The USISA survey showing that availability of technology enhanced learning support staff was identified as one of the main factors encouraging development of TEL within institutions. And that's reinforced by a recent EduCause report on faculty development in higher education, which said instructional technologists and their availability has been positively associated with faculty development. So, just to summarise, effective communication is the cornerstone of successful change management, particularly in the context of digital initiatives. I think that the language of transformation, excellence and innovation can be quite damaging. It can be perceived as threatening and it can generate resistance, and we need to think about that when we put forward many of our initiatives. Trying to address digital capabilities and lead changes necessitates sustained engagement and carefully planned out communication strategies. But for us, and I think this is leading into our debate this afternoon, instructional technologists, learning technologists, IT trainers will be key enablers for change in the future. So hopefully we're on time. Thank you very much.